Hello world and welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Hello, welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020, everyone.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020. Cheers from Brazil and South America community.
Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020.
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 Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody from all around the world. Thank you for being here, because without you, this is just a self-talk. First, I would like to ask 1 minute from you all for me to thank the volunteers that make this happen. In alphabetical order, Anas, Arthur, Chiho, Claudia, Tong, Fatin, Hafizi, Hilmi, James, Jason, Jesse, Wanli, Wenyan, Mihu, Nagi, Nazmi, Noah, Paul, Pratibha, Shamalan, Kayan, Vincent, and Zulika, and many more of you that are behind the scene as well. Thank you very much. Without you all, this would not happen. And many of you still work until late night last night. Now, when we first decided to host the PyCon APAC this year, we have decided to choose Kota Kinabalu, Sabah to host it. For it is a tourist city. We want to show you the beauty of Malaysia other than sharing the knowledge during the conference. But COVID-19 hit us. So we decided to move the event online in May this year. After much planning, we start to prepare for the event intensively in July and August. A lot of learning along the way, and it's more challenging than we thought. But I must say that we enjoy very much along the way. This year, we have decided to have more tutorials and panel discussions. I'm glad that we'll be able to get the speakers from all around the world to join us. We also have other community members to join us in the event. For example, from Women Who Code, Hackathon Kaki, Dev Kami, and Kinabalu Coders, who also help us in organizing this event. I would like also to thank the sponsors, Microsoft, JetBrain, Vonage, Tezos, and Gandhi.net. When we spoke to the sponsors that there are a lot of issues that we are not sure and we can't how it's going to turn out. But the sponsors are very encouraging and very understanding that take a lot of anxiety away from us. Thank you very much. And not to forget to thank the Python community all around the world for the shout out of the event. And we also do get helps from Taiwan, the Philippines, and all the way from the States and as well as Mauritius. But as the event gets closer, I'm not only getting more excited, but I actually go to sleep with a smile on my face, knowing that the event's going to turn out good. Really, across my heart, I do feel very happy to go to sleep every single day because of help I get all around the world. Now, before we begin, there is a few house rules that I would like to mention in order to have this event go on smoothly. First, always observe the Python community code of conduct. Secondly, during the interview or the panel sessions, if you have any questions, do type it out in the live chat sessions rather than the comment, as we'll pick up the questions from the live chat. We also have a lightning talk scheduled on today and the 20th of September. So the link to sign up for this is in the description of the talk. To sign it up and pay attention to the email, you'll get the link to join the lightning talk. Now, let's the event begins. Our first guest for today hails from Holland and settled down in San Francisco. He worked in Dropbox before retirement, and he loved parentheses. This is none other than the creator of Python, Guido van Rossum. Hi, Guido. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Ivy. Thanks for having me.
All right. Shall we just get right into it?
Sure.
Now, first, what is the biggest challenge you face when you're creating the Python?
Well, assuming that I'm allowed to pick events from the past 30 years, because creating Python wasn't done in 3 months, I would say that the biggest challenge was the transition to Python 3. from Python 2 to Python 3, the core development team, including myself, very much underestimated how fast we would be able to get the community to move all their code to Python 3. And so we had to sort of seriously rethink our strategies, and we had to give the community much more time and do all kinds of sort of political things to try and get people to actually want to migrate to Python 3. And I'm very glad that that is basically behind us. Obviously, there are still people who are still tasked with migrating legacy Python code bases, but I'm not one of them anymore. And in general, since last April, Python 2 is officially unsupported by the core development team. So that feels good, but that has been a really long trip. We started that more than 10 years ago. So I would say that was the biggest challenge, creating Python.
Good, thank you. Now, of the great developers that you have worked before, what kind of common characteristic you see in them to bring them to where they are?
I think great developers often have a lot of humility. They must be good at communicating. If you're good at coding, but you cannot communicate your ideas clearly to other people except by writing code, you're not going to be a great developer. You have to be able to sort of share your ideas and also be open to accepting contributions from others. The last thing that I think great developers do is mentoring. A developer who is a great developer will always take younger junior developers under their wings, and one way or another teach them a lot of stuff that you can't teach, that you can't learn by reading a book or sitting in a class. You have to sort of learn from people who have gone through various challenges. And I know that I myself have learned a lot from other developers over the past 45 years or so. Excuse me. So I think humility, communication, and mentoring are the sort of the key characteristics of great developers to me.
All right, thank you. In one of the interview, I remember you mentioned that like the core developer community and the conference community or the users are quite different group of people. How do you hope to see the synergy between this group of people?
Yeah, so the difference is that it's much easier, obviously, to become a user of a language than it is to become a core developer. Core developers, at least in Python's case, and I think that's true for all sort of major open source languages that have a large community. The core development team is people who have more than 5 years, often more than 10 years experience working on that particular language behind the scenes. Users, of course, new users enter the community with sort of very basic skills, and that is wonderful. Python wouldn't have grown if it wasn't easy to learn, and sort of we welcome all users. The core development team obviously needs to sort of take the needs of users into account, because the core development team doesn't sort of improve the language for their own needs only. Absolutely not. I mean, when I started 30 years ago with Python, maybe my idea was that I wanted something for myself. But very quickly, as soon as I started sharing it with other people, sort of the task of me as the initial core developer was very much sort of listen to users, again, this communication, to make sure that the language actually solves problems that users need solved. At the same time, of course, you need to be sort of opinionated and selective as a core developer, because there are too many users. If you listen to everyone, you cannot choose what direction to take the language, but you have to sort of listen to a lot of users and then make decisions. Of course, users also contribute to the core development in many ways. First of all, just by being enthusiastic users and telling other people about what they like about the language. Second of all, users sort of sometimes come up with feature requests or stumble across bugs that they report through a bug tracker. And eventually somewhat experienced users may find an area of the language where they know more than the language's core developers, and they can start contributing to the standard library or to the interpreter. So new core developers almost always start out as very active users. Nobody says, I want to be Python core developer without first having been a Python user and really sort of liked the experience. So that's the sort of the interaction between users and core developers has all those aspects.
All right, thank you. Continuing from that questions, I do see that like most of the core developers are actually coming from the North America as well as from the Europe. I kind of like track them down a little bit. Just want to have an opinion from you. What could be that constitute to that situations?
Part of that is probably just historical. I mean, I am from Europe, and then I moved to the United States. And the sort of the first groups of core developers were people who sort of were in some sense close to me. Like the first two contributors to Python besides myself were literally my office mates at the place where I worked in Amsterdam 30 years ago. And then I started sort of communicating about Python on mailing lists that were mostly run by North American user communities of especially Unix systems. So the sort of that history started out as a very sort of Western European American sort of group. We would always use English as the language to communicate. If your English is insufficient, I mentioned that before, it's difficult to become a good core developer because you can't communicate exclusively in code and patches. Of course, we sort of, as Python's popularity has grown all over the world, we've tried to pick up developers from all continents except South Antarctica. And we have a few everywhere, but North America and Europe are definitely still overrepresented. We're trying to be open, but it's not always easy to sort of know what it takes, what people need to become core developers besides English skills and access to the internet, of course, and plenty of spare time. But clearly, people have that all over the world. So we're hoping that will improve.
All right, thank you. For the audience, if you do have any questions, feel free to type in the live chat. We will pick it up. All right. Next questions. In the last day of last year, I heard one of your interview, and you did mention about if you could have put like Perl and Amoeba together, but then there could be no Python and nobody would know Guido. I believe there is some balance of like technical knowledge and creativity for a new language over here. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
There was a slight blip in the sound, but I think you're asking about creativity versus technical knowledge and how that sort of... I would say that both of those are very important if you want to move a programming language or almost any sort of major piece of software forward. If you don't have enough technical knowledge, then regardless how creative you are, your ideas for what the language could how the language could change or improve are often impossible to sort of implement, because I mean, I've seen this so many times on our Python ideas mailing list, where people make proposals for things that our parser cannot recognize, or that are actually corner cases of already existing syntax, or that would just sort of break a whole bunch of code. And poor people aren't always... Sorry, I don't mean like poor in terms of finances. I mean the poor guy who proposes that thinks they have a great idea, but they don't have enough technical knowledge about how programming languages are generally built, from parser to bytecode compiler to interpreter and runtime environment, to sort of come up with the right kind of idea. So you have to have a certain amount of technical knowledge. On the other hand, if all you have is technical knowledge, if you don't have any creativity, it's unlikely that you come up with a sort of a new programming language, or even a sort of a new module or a small new feature, because you spend all your time on the nitty-gritty details. And so I think creativity and technical knowledge are sort of two different sides of language design and development. And I feel very lucky when I encounter people who have sort of both in equal amounts.
Cool, thank you. I'm going to take the questions from the audience. This one is from Alphonsus. He is asking that, what are you working on recently?
So in the past year, I've spent a lot of time on a new parser for Python. That parser got released, or well, that technically will be released very soon in Python 3.9, which will come out in a few weeks, I believe. The final release candidate actually goes out next Monday, and after that, I think it's maybe 2 or 3 weeks until 3.9.0 gets released. So that has a new parser that I spent a lot of time on, together with mostly 2 other people, Pablo and Lissandros, 2 other core devs. Lissandros actually wasn't a core dev before the project started, but he contributed so much that he got promoted. So it happens, and Lissandros is a great guy, and Pablo is a more experienced core dev who is now the Python 3.10 release manager. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time on that parser. One of my more recent projects has actually been looking into how we can make the error messages of the parser more human-friendly. There are too many cases where the only error you get is syntax error here, and it points to a point in the code, and it's clear that there's something wrong there, but the parser ought to be more expressive, and I've been sort of looking for algorithms and reading a bunch of papers trying to understand how other people have solved similar problems in their parsers for other languages. And I'm still in the middle of sort of trying to test my ideas on larger sort of test data sets. The other project that I've worked on quite hard in the past 6 months or so is a proposal, which is still just a proposal for adding pattern matching to Python 3.10. That's been mostly a very creative project where I have a total of 5 other co-authors. We wrote, I think, the longest PEP in history. So all those things keep me pretty busy.
All right, thank you. I'll take another question from James. He asked, how would you foresee, apart from Python, C is being used in the core development or other language being used in developing Python and be included into the Python core ecosystem?
I'm sorry, is there anywhere where I can read the question?
Yes, it's being shown in the screen.
Oh, wait, here it is. How would you foresee, apart from Python, C being used as core development of Python? Other languages are included into Python core ecosystem. There's actually a reason that we're not eager to include other languages in the core ecosystem, because Python needs to be portable to many different target platforms. I mean, normally people use Python on like Linux, all the BSDs, macOS, and Windows, but there are also people who cross-compile Python for iPhone and Android phones or tablets. And there are probably a bunch of other platforms where CPython runs that I don't even know. Someone has probably ported it to IBM mainframes as well as to something like an Xbox. Anyway, because of that, every new language you add to the requirements for the runtime, say we had one extension that for some reason we wanted to write it in C++ instead of C. Well, that's relatively straightforward, you'd think, because in most platforms, the C compiler is just sort of a flag of the C++ compiler almost. They can bundle together. But even that is not easy because C++ compilers differ quite a bit between platforms, and now suddenly you have to figure out how to actually invoke the C++ compiler for each of the target platforms that we support out of the box. Let alone suppose that we were saying some core extensions are written in Rust. Now we suddenly have to be able to use the Rust toolchain on every platform, or at least to build for every platform. And of course, Rust developers say, oh, sure, Rust is super portable. We have compilers that work for all platforms. And in fact, it's always the same compiler with just a different code generation backend. But in practice, if you sort of have to invoke that compiler, it's not always so easy. On Windows, our compiler interface is completely different than on Unix or Mac systems. And even on Mac, it's different because the compiler is Clang, and all the compiler flags are different. And there's all sorts of reasons why extra languages are a major pain. So in the larger ecosystem, third-party modules can be written using all kinds of different languages. It's much easier to figure out for a particular third-party module. And if that module doesn't work on one particular platform, well, maybe the users of that platform don't need that, or eventually they can contribute changes. But for core Python, we need to be incredibly conservative in sort of our use of tool chains. And that is often a major pain because it means that core developers have to sort of write in only the portable subset of C that is approved by there's a particular PEP about this actually. But So unfortunately, I don't see a lot of other languages being used for the runtime. Now, it's possible that someone writes a whole brand new Python runtime, but unfortunately, we found that the community is not so eager to adopt those things. We have seen this with PyPy, we have seen this with Jython, we have seen this with IronPython. The vast majority of Python users care about CPython, and they want every extension that exists for CPython to work, and so that sort of keeps them from trying out other languages. PyPy in particular has done a lot of work to be compatible with a large variety of third-party extensions, but it's still far from perfect, and the interface between those extensions and PyPy suddenly can slow things down quite a bit.
All right, thank you. I'm taking another questions from the audience. It's coming from Swimming. He asked, are you surprised the way Python's being used now, from a language for scripting and learning to a language to power the state of the art of AI, and from the use to computer to embedded system?
Absolutely. I'm flabbergasted by how Python has been used in different ways. And until, say, a decade ago, data science and AI, machine learning, were not really on the radar so much. And what people were using Python for primarily was things like databases, scripting, build tools, other kinds of internal tooling, sometimes very large internal tools, web servers, web clients, user interfaces, and all those things were things that I had sort of dabbled in myself. I've written some user interfaces. I've written a bunch of SQL. I've written a lot of sort of low-level web code, although I don't understand anything about CSS these days. But machine learning, sort of, for me, it still is a sort of a novel thing. I don't quite understand how it works yet. Still, I've never actually tried to do anything with machine learning myself. Maybe I should sort of bite the bullet and figure out how to just take a class, basic TensorFlow or PyTorch. But at the moment, I sort of, that has definitely surprised me quite a bit. And of course, if you look carefully, the typical machine learning application, maybe quite a few lines of Python code, but in the end, all the computational energy goes to the training code, which is either written in C++ or runs on a GPU, and in either case is that Python anymore. But Python, of course, is used to drive it, which is one of the sort of traditional applications for Python. But it's definitely a new and different field, and I wish I knew more about it, to be honest.
All right, thank you. Maybe you will have more surprise coming your way in the future. Now, next, I will take another question from Daniel Feldroy. He asked, beside Python and C, what languages do you like?
Oh, that is hard, because I don't actually know any other languages. I know a little bit of Java. I know a little bit of C++. I know a little bit of JavaScript. I've read a Go tutorial. I've skimmed a Rust tutorial. I've tried to learn Haskell a few times without any success. So I can't really say that there are other languages that that I personally really like. Maybe I mean, even before I started Python, I was like a C programmer. And before C, I had used a number of other languages, none of which are in use anymore, really. I mean, my favorite language for many years was actually Pascal. Before that, it was Algol 60, and I remember going through a few years of Algol 68 as well. But nobody these days knows the difference between Algol 60 and Algol 68, even though they were completely different languages. But Pascal for a very long time was my favorite, but I really can't recommend that, obviously. So I'm sorry. Yeah, that was a good question and sort of a very disappointing answer. I'm sorry for that. And hi, Danny.
Thank you. Now, the next question is coming from Job. He asked, what is your vision as to what Python will be 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, I'm a terrible futurist. I have always completely mispredicted where Python would be in the future. For example, I had never imagined that Python would be as popular as it currently is. And I had never thought that there would be so much AI and machine learning in the Python world. I think 5 years from now, machine learning will explode, and we'll see sort of interesting sort of new things happening in that world where Python may play a larger role or may play a smaller role. 10 years from now, I think that maybe there will even be alternate Python runtime implementations that are much faster than CPython is today, and are actually sufficiently compatible to get a lot of users excited about that. But I have no idea. That ask me again in 5 years how bad my predictions actually were and what I think will happen in 5 years after them.
All right, thank you. Next, I'll take the questions from Nagi. She asked, what do you think on the future of game development in Python?
Oh, that's an area where I know very little myself as well. I think Python kind of lost the battle for scripting in large game applications. I do think that for sort of small scale game development, there are some good Python libraries, but I don't actually know much about that world. So other than Pygame, which I think is still very much a thing and a lot of fun, I don't know what people use these days or where it's going. Hopefully, the gaming development community has at least switched to Python 3.
All right, thank you. For the audience, we probably still have time to take 2 to 3 questions from the floor. So do send in your questions if you do have. Now, the next questions I would like to ask is, who impact you the most? Not only like in terms of the whole programming journey, but as a whole.
Well, I don't know if there's a corny answer, but I think my dad was a very big influence. He was actually a pretty laid-back guy. He never sort of told me what to do or what to choose. He always sort of sat back and enjoyed the choices I made. And so his supportiveness, his sort of, let Guido figure it out. And I was a very different kid, I think, than he had expected. And so his sort of relaxed attitude about letting his kid develop in ways that he hadn't anticipated was important. The other thing that sort of puts him on this list for me is he was an architect and he had quite a good design sense. And so visual design, graphic design, but also like architectural design or furniture design were things that just as a child and a teenager, my dad was always talking about these things. He showed us modern art. He took us to interesting buildings, both old and new. He had a collection of books about modern art that I found fascinating. And so apparently his design sense was sort of inheritable, because my brother is also a graphics designer with a specialization in font design. So in the world of font designers, I am the brother of the famous font designer Guido van Rossum. And there's some synergy there because he's also a Python core developer.
Oh, thank you. All right. There's one question coming from the audience, from Manu. He asked, have you seen anything interesting for packaging Python desktop apps recently?
I have not. I think it's not an area that I've researched myself. I usually just write scripts for myself, so I don't need to do much packaging. And when I worked at Dropbox, obviously there was the Dropbox client, but all the packaging was basically custom made for Dropbox by Dropbox. I think that is an area where there's room for new development. I wouldn't know exactly where that development will come from, unfortunately. And I must sound like the world's least informed Python developer, because I don't know anything about so many subjects, but that's my answer. I apologize.
No problem. Thank you. I do have a question. Just now you do mention like humility is very important to become a good core developer. And now when we are building a lot of applications for everybody use, that is a high tech that like we after. And in that process, we kind of like losing the high touch. So for the technology and the touch and the humility, how would you strike a balance yourself?
Do I hear it right that you're asking about the balance between humanity and technology?
Yes.
That is a very nice contrast. And I think it's quite possible to sort of practice technology while sort of keeping your humanity and sort of being attentive to users. Look what people really need. I'm personally quite skeptical about various aspects of social media that look like the only goal is to get users addicted and then sell lots of advertisements. That's sort of a very unpleasant approach to using technology that I find, despite the word social in the name of social media, is actually losing the humanity quite a bit. So in the Python community, I hope that will always sort of keep our humanity and sort of we should have fun together. It's a terrible shame that this year has turned out nobody can get together and have fun in person. It's much harder to have fun together online. But hopefully next year there will be in-person meetings again, and we will all share a bit of our humanity around our our passion for certain types of technology. And
definitely that like we do hope to meet each other in person. Now there is one more question coming from the audience from Chiku Python. He asked or she asked, in the core of language development, since it is open source, how did the team get funded?
Yeah, so all the core developers are essentially volunteers. And some of us are students. Some of us are employees of tech companies, large and small, and almost none of us ever get paid for doing core Python developer work. When I worked at Google, because I was Python's BDFL, I was allowed to use 50% of my time to do just core Python work, but that is very, very rare. Almost no other core developer has a deal like that. Some people are lucky and they can spend like 1 day a week of their employer's time on core Python. Many of the core developers basically work evenings and weekends, or maybe they steal a minute here and a minute there from their employer and they make it up by answering work emails all night long. So funding is difficult. It's much easier to get people to sponsor a conference because a conference comes with sort of a standard way of putting a big name in front of an audience, sponsored by whatever. Platinum sponsors, gold sponsors, even online conferences get some sponsorship, I heard. But sponsoring core developers is much more complicated. The Python Software Foundation is finally beginning to look into funding some small amount of core development work, and but even there, mostly they actually what they do is going to other nonprofit foundations that want to fund projects and say there are specific projects that are very important for the Python community as a whole. We have someone lined up who can do that work. Can you spare some money to pay that person for 3 months or a year? But it's difficult. It's a lot of it is volunteer work. This is one of the reasons why it's hard to get new core developers, because apart from reputation, you don't get any rewards for all your work. So you got to do it because you actually enjoy doing that work.
All right, thank you. One more questions from the floor. From KK Young, he asked, or she asked, what is the most challenging thing for developing and optimizing Python compiler?
I would say there are two challenges actually that I can think of. One is static analysis of the source code to try and understand whether a particular for loop uses, say, integers or strings or some other object, and generating appropriate optimal code. PyPy does that with a just-in-time compiler. And PyPy is an incredibly complex system. CPython has nothing like that. Everything is purely interpreted, and it would be quite a challenge to sort of make Python code run as fast as you'd think it would run if all you know is how C compilers work. The other very specific challenge for Python to make it faster is the global interpreter lock, the GIL, which in many cases actually is not a challenge at all, because people only run one thread. But people who want to run multiple threads and want to actually use multiple cores that are present on their computer have to go to use all kinds of tricks at the moment, because the global interpreter lock basically only lets one thread use the CPU at a time. So that is a very big challenge, and several very experienced core developers have tried to tackle that, and so far not succeeded. That sort of the best result was Larry Hastings' Galactomy, which scaled better to multiple CPUs, but the baseline speed was so much slower that I think he essentially gave up on that particular approach.
All right, here is a question from Mark. He asked, how do you keep your edge as a developer, especially being one of the top brains of Python?
Well, my trick is actually that I wait for other people to tell me what's important. I've been doing that for a very long time. I don't spend a whole lot of time reading blogs or the trade literature, but when a coworker or another core developer says, hey, have you heard that such and such is happening? Or what do you think of this technology? I can say, well, I have no idea, but let me look it up. And that's how I learn.
All right, cool. There's one more questions from Pratipa. Have you recently seen an interesting cybersecurity product developed in Python?
I'm no expert in cybersecurity. What I know, Python is very popular among hackers, actually. So I don't know if that's a cybersecurity. It's more a cybersecurity attack product. But I believe that certain botnets and certain attacks are using Python as their main development language, and we've recently actually had a PEP that came out of Microsoft by Steve Dower about sort of making it possible to compile Python with an option so that it sort of generates system logging events when Python is used for any kind of suspicious activity. So Python is definitely sort of well known in the hacker world, and I assume that means that it's also well known in the cybersecurity defense world. I don't know any specific products. Long ago, when I first moved to California, I worked for a cybersecurity company, but all the development work was actually in Java.
All right, thank you. There is one question from Albert. What inspired you to do what you do?
Oh, what inspires me? Well, sometimes I feel it's just curiosity, and sometimes I feel it's like keeping my family fed, at least for a very long time, especially since I got a child in 2001. Sort of one of the inspirations was actually stability for my family, and that sort of made me choose a certain type of employment. Other inspiration has always been I like to code, and I like to share the code I've written. I mean, when I was first learning to code on a mainframe using punch cards, very early on, sort of once we actually had a little bit online access as a student, one of the first things I tried was I wanted to make my own text editor because I wasn't happy with the system text editor. And I remember writing a mail system and writing an archive utility. And all those things I tried to share with other people. And sometimes I was successful. Like the archive utility was quite popular among all the users of that mainframe. And that the mail utility never got more than 3 users, I believe. So sharing.
All right. Cool. So everybody start sharing more. I'll take one more questions from the floor and then one questions from myself. Then we'll wrap up the sessions. Now this is from Dima. Being a contributor for big things like Python just too advanced for me right now, but what should I do if I want to become one of them?
Well, I would recommend practice on smaller projects, practice contributing to smaller things. Don't say, today I know nothing, but I'm going to set my sights on becoming a Python core developer, or maybe you want to become a member of the C++ standards committee, or maybe you want to become a Ruby core dev. Instead, sort of follow your curiosity about smaller projects. It's easier to get into Django than it is to get into Python. It's probably easier to get into one particular Django subsystem than it is to get into Django, the core. Python's package registry has, I believe, hundreds of thousands of packages, and I'm sure there are a bunch of duplicates and uninteresting things, but there are also many, many interesting packages that have a small number of users and but growing, and one developer who is sort of slowly getting overloaded with work because with more users come more bug reports and more feature requests and more questions and complaints and suggestions. And so those people can use help from someone who is interested in sort of working on the same code base.
Cool, thank you. Now, I do have one last question for you. What would you say to non-Python user?
Ouch. Non-Python users, well, there are two possible things. One is maybe a non-Python user is actually interested in learning a bit more about programming, and they think they couldn't possibly learn that because they were always bad in math. That's one of those cliches. People always say, oh, I was so bad in math in high school. I couldn't possibly learn any programming skill. That's not necessarily true. You change, and programming skills are somewhat different than math skills. So if you want to learn more about coding, it wouldn't be such a terrible idea to start with Python, because Python is actually a very easy language to learn. There are many good tutorials online, several of them completely free. Probably also in different languages, not just in English. Then, of course, there are the people who, again, say, oh, I don't know anything about programming. I have no interest in learning, but I don't understand why my boyfriend or girlfriend or my teenage kid is so incredibly fascinated with this programming topic. And I would like to explain to them that it's just being able to create stuff with your bare hands, just using a computer and seeing, like, being only limited by your own creativity, sort of being able to produce crazy shapes or colors, or maybe solve weird problems in other fields of science by data science. You can do so much, and it can be so much fun. And that's why people are so into it sometimes. So give them some slack and sort of let them share their enthusiasm.
All right. Thank you very much, Guido, for being in these sessions. This will wrap the whole sessions up. Do also go and listen to the panel sessions that we are going to have and go ask them questions too. And we do have...
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. Then we'll see you. Hope to see you other time. And bye to the audience. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to PyCon APAC 2020. This is the introduction of PyCon Hong Kong. I am Sammy Fong, the conference chair of PyCon Hong Kong. Hong Kong is an international city in Asia. A lot of travelers around the world visit and transit in Hong Kong. 10 years ago, we have the first Python user group meetup. And after I visited PyCon APAC in Tokyo, I plan to organize PyCon Hong Kong, and we started from 2015. 35% of our speakers comes from other countries in Asia, Europe, and America. We are not just a local PyCon in the city, and it is also for the global and Asia Python community. We have about 200 participants every year. This year in November, we will organize the second online PyCon Hong Kong, and we allow calling for proposals. And you can check out the CFP details at the website pycon.hk. I hope you can submit your proposals to us and join our conference. We will also encourage our participants to make the donation to the PSF. And stay safe. And I hope we can meet you soon in PyCon. Thank you.